Welcome back to the California Conversation. I'm Tess Abraham. Well, folks, things have shifted, and they have shifted significantly. So as we talked about last week, the results of California's primary election on Election Day looked very promising for conservatives. And there are still good trends that we can examine. I still stand by some of the trends that we talked about last week. But unfortunately, things have shifted majorly to where several of the Republicans who were pulling in the lead across different races have now fallen to second or even third place. This has ignited a debate that usually comes up anytime there's an election in California, which is, why does it take so long to count the ballots? How can candidates who are leading significantly on election night suddenly flip what seems like overnight or over just a few days to being completely down in the results? And can we actually trust California's elections? I am breaking it all down for you today. We are going to talk about how California's election system works. We're going to talk about vulnerabilities in our system that actually do lead to fraud and abuse. And we are going to look at what changed in the results since the last time we talked, because unfortunately, there's a lot to cover there. But before we get started, make sure to like this video, subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, and ring that notification bell so that you stay up to date on all things California politics. And if you want more information or you want the sources cited in compiling today's episode, then you should check out the corresponding article on my website, which is linked below. So let's start with the election updates. What has changed? And I am so sad to be bringing you these updates. I was so excited last week. So excited that many of you called me naive in the comments and said, I must not watch the news. Well, I do see the news and things looked good last week. Unfortunately, they've changed. So what has happened? Well, with the governor's race, this was to be expected. I said last week that things could flip around. Steyer is still in third place, so that's good news. Hilton and Becerra are still in the top two. However, Hilton and Becerra have flipped. So with 83% of the votes counted, Becerra is now up to 27.7% of the votes. Hilton has dropped down to 25.1%, and Tom Steyer is at 22.4%. And so we still have those same top two, but you can see there's a little bit more danger that Hilton could dip into third place if enough of the uncounted ballots are for someone like Steyer. When it comes to the other races, there haven't been significant changes to where the top two have shifted. In the same pattern, a lot of the Republicans who were pulling in the lead and were in first place, a lot of them have dropped to second, but the races are really close. And then in addition to that, we have some good and bad news. So with the insurance commissioner, that one, 2 Democrats were in the lead to begin with. That has only continued to grow. The radical who I talked about last week, she is currently even further in the lead, while Stacey Korsgaden, who is the Republican that I have really been pulling for, she has fallen very solidly into third. So no major changes there, but not quite the changes we were hoping to see. And then on the flip side, on the good side, when it comes to the superintendent of public education, Sonia Shaw, who is more conservative, she is still solidly in the lead. So that hasn't flipped either. So really across the board, not too many updates when it comes to the statewide races, but interesting to see that there have been some shifts and that we need to pay attention to the final outcome that I don't even know when that's going to be projected. A couple weeks still. Whenever that comes out, we need to keep watching for that. The worst news really is around the LA mayoral race. So if you remember, last week, Karen Bass came out strong with 35% of the votes. Spencer Pratt was right behind her with 30% of the votes. And Nithya Raman was between 20 and 22%, depending on what source you looked at. So he had a really solid lead on Raman, and everyone thought Pratt made it to the top two. This is fantastic. That's going to be our runoff. But over the past several days, new ballot drops have actually completely flipped that order. And so Pratt has been knocked into third place. He moved from his 30% down to 25.8%, and Raman boosted up from that 20 to 22% to 28.5%. And this is really shocking because if you saw what happened on election night, Nithya Raman actually came out and she gave a speech as the votes were coming out, as the results were coming out on the news, and she was crying during her speech and apologizing for failing the people that wanted her to succeed in getting to this office, or at least to November. And so no one really saw this coming. It seems kind of out of the blue that she could jump from such a distinct third place all the way up to now second place, right behind Karen Bass, who is the incumbent. So all of this has clearly raised a lot of questions about election integrity in California. Questions like, why does it take so long to count the votes? There are so many other states that can have their results on election night. There are other countries that can count votes faster than we can. Why is this taking so long? How can it be that candidates who had such a big lead are now being pulled to where they're not even going to make it to the general election in November? That seems really interesting. That seems strange. And then, of course, as I mentioned, can we really trust this process? Can we trust that elections in California are fair, or are they all just rigged by some unknown source to us? These are really important questions, and I want to address them because election integrity is severely important. Elections are the bedrock of our representative democracy. Any sort of representative government is going to hinge on the people being represented. And so if elections are fraudulent or elections are rigged or you can't trust election results, then you don't trust that you have a representative government. You think that your vote and your voice truly don't matter. And that leads to a lot of despair for people to disengage from the process. But when talking about election integrity, I think that there's two extremes that people run to, and I would say both of them are wrong for separate reasons. The first extreme says that any questions about election integrity are conspiratorial or fringe. This is the side that the minute you bring up, it seems weird that something is going on here, they just say, oh, you're a conspiracy theorist. And I think that's wrong because, as I just said, elections are incredibly important. We should be able to challenge our government. We challenge our government every week here on this show with different topics. We should be able to ask questions and receive answers. And voters are owed answers by their government, answers about how their taxpayer dollars are spent, answers about all of the programs and their effectiveness that our government is running, and of course, answers about our own elections and how we can be ensured that they are free and fair elections. But then on the other side, we have another extreme that says any sort of adverse outcome or any sort of unexpected shift automatically proves that an election is rigged. And so these are people who even will go so far as to say, I don't even vote. I don't care about voting because nothing really matters. You can't do anything. It's all rigged in California. And maybe they don't even have any sort of proof or evidence to back up those claims. I think that big accusations, that real accusations, need to have some sort of evidence. They need to have some sort of grounding in data or in building your case and building your argument. I know that can be hard to find with elections. I know the arguments that it can be hard to find if you feel that the system is against you. But we need to examine what are the things that we know? What are the things that we are sure of? Where are the vulnerabilities, the weaknesses, the potentials for fraud, the areas where things have gone wrong? Where are those things that we can solidly point to and say these things need to change versus just throwing up our hands to say everything is a conspiracy and everything is rigged to work against us? So the challenge is to find the middle. To find the middle ground that says we need to question and we need to hold our government accountable and we need to push for transparency because we absolutely do. And yet at the same time, not giving ourselves over to despair and not giving ourselves over to believing every single conspiracy that we come across just because we distrust or disbelieve our government. So that's what I want to do. I want to be able to help us find that middle ground, to challenge where we should be pressing in our state to actually make change and how we can think about election integrity in a state like ours. To answer those questions, we need to first understand the process because the process in California is a little bit different than processes in other states, and this is going to vary across the country. And so a lot of times we might have questions about why certain things are happening, why the votes take so long to count, what is really going on, but we don't actually understand what is happening. And so instead of pinning that automatically on a conspiracy, we need to first understand what are the steps in the process, where are the legitimate bottlenecks before we get into where are the vulnerabilities and where are things going wrong. So let's break down step by step why California takes forever to finish voting the counts, because really it is very ridiculous. So under California law, county election officials have 30 days after the election day to actually certify the results, which then the Secretary of State of California will then certify. This off the bat is why the counting goes on for weeks, because instead of having all of the mail-in ballots counted by election day, instead of trying to count them within a couple days of election day, they have 30 days for every county. So what are they doing during this 30-day process? Why do they need this time? They're doing a couple things. First of all, they're verifying signatures. So every mail-in ballot that is going to be accepted, you have to sign that. That signature has to be verified to the signature that is on your account, that is part of your voter registration. But the problem is, in California, if a signature doesn't match exactly, or if it is questionable, then there's a ballot curing process. And so that means that the state has 2 weeks to notify voters that the fact that they need to update or correct their signature, and then voters have 22 days to submit their correction. So that's a huge bottleneck that already is completely slowing down the process, because instead of trying to do that beforehand for ballots that were already mailed in, they don't start that process even till election day. They also are going through the different provisional ballots. So a provisional ballot is a ballot that's cast at the time of voting when a voter's registration status cannot be confirmed. So if you showed up to the polls and your registration couldn't be confirmed, you can still cast this provisional ballot, but that means election officials after election day have to go through and they have to independently verify that your registration was correct and in order so that your ballot can be counted. And then on top of that, we have same-day voter registration in California. So anyone who registers the same day at the polls and then casts their ballot, their registration has to be finalized and also has to be confirmed. So they're doing multiple of those processes over these 30 days. Lastly, we have vote by mail in California. As long as it's postmarked by election day and received within 7 days after election day, that's still counted. So on election night, there are still so many ballots that could be coming in the mail. You could not even get them until a full 7 days later, and those are still going to be counted. So just by design, under California law, our process is designed to take a month. Our process is designed to take several weeks. It is not designed to give us results on election night. And that's incredibly frustrating to voters, because the voters, I think rightly so, have an expectation that they are going to know who wins the races. And so then when different ballots come in, when certain statuses are actually verified, when signatures are corrected on ballots, that is going to shift those initial results that you saw on election night or in the subsequent days. And so suddenly we start to see all of these shifts and people start to panic or freak out of what is going on. Why are the numbers shifting? Well, a lot of them are shifting just because that, again, is how the process is designed to work. But the way the votes are counted are just the tip of the iceberg. That doesn't even really account for a lot of the suspicions or the distrust around California's elections. There are two consequential processes that have been passed through policy in California that actually boil down where the key vulnerabilities in our state lie. And those are in voter registration and ballot harvesting. So first, voter registration in California is laughable. It's so laughable. So let's just go through the process. When you go to register, if you go to the Secretary of State website and you want to register to vote, you are going to be asked for your driver's license ID or for the last four of your social security number. What is supposed to happen is they are supposed to be able to take that information and run it against the DMV or the Social Security Administration databases. The reason that they do this, the purpose for this, is to verify your identity and ultimately to verify your eligibility, because under law, we are only supposed to allow citizens of the United States to be voting in our elections. And so the way that you would verify citizenship is through these forms of identification. But here's the problem. In California, clearly on the website, you can check a box that says, I don't have a driver's license or I don't have a social security number. And you can check boxes for both of those, and you'll be sent down the alternate identification route. What this means is that there are a whole host of other forms of ID that California will accept in order to register you to vote. But these other forms of ID are not directly linked to to be able to verifying your identity and eligibility for you to be able to participate in elections. All they do is verify that you live at a California address. So for example, some of these are to provide your credit card, your utility bill, or even your gym membership. How your gym membership would actually tell the government that you are eligible as a citizen of the United States to vote in an election is, again, laughable. And the full list is even more egregious than just the 3 examples I gave. The full list has, you can submit a prescription label, you can submit a criminal pardon document, you can submit a public housing ID card, you can submit your sample ballot that you received in the mail, and you can submit a lease agreement. So you can submit any of those things, and that will satisfy the requirements to register you to vote. But non-citizens who live in California can have any of those things. Non-citizens can have lease agreements. Non-citizens can go to the gym. Non-citizens can have a prescription label. That doesn't prove anything about your identity. That doesn't prove anything about your eligibility. A senior legal fellow at Advancing American Freedom said it absolutely perfectly. He said, quote, "Allowing a gym membership is ridiculous. I can create a gym membership card on my laptop using Microsoft Word. In fact, that's the whole reason that states require a government-issued photo ID for all kinds of things, including getting a marriage license or cashing a check or to buy alcohol. The idea that you would use a gym membership to prove ID is just absurd. That does absolutely nothing." California's own constitution limits your ability to vote to citizens only. But California doesn't have any mechanisms in place to actually enforce that or to check for that when it comes to voter registration and then voting at the polls. And so rightfully, we need to recognize this as a core weakness in California's electoral system. This is absolutely an area that needs to be completely, radically changed if California wants its voters to have assurance in its elections and in its election results. So this is an area that we should question. This is an area we absolutely can call out as wrong, as sketchy, and as saying there's probably a lot of underlying fraud happening. But if you think that that is bad, just wait until you hear about ballot harvesting, because I believe that ballot harvesting is the worst thing in our state's systems when it comes to our elections, and a significant structural vulnerability designed in California that puts us at severe risk of fraud being perpetuated election over election. In 2016, we passed Assembly Bill 1921. What this did is it legalized and expanded ballot harvesting in California. Now, in case you don't know, ballot harvesting is a process wherein a third party is authorized to take your ballot and submit it for you. So this means that someone can go door to door. People who work for campaigns do this. You can go door to door and you can pick up people's ballots for them and go to a ballot drop box and drop them off. So what happens is usually this means that people who are registered to vote, let's say you're a registered Democrat in California, campaign operatives who want the Democrat candidate to push forward will go door to door to all of the registered Democrats, and they will say, "Hey, are you planning to vote? Do you have your ballot? Can I take that for you? And can I drop it off?" And so then those people will show up to a ballot drop box with hundreds of ballots and they will submit them. This introduces a whole host of ethically questionable concerns, because the entire point of voting, the entire point is that people are going to be represented and take part, an active part, in having a say in their government. So the idea is we want people to be informed. We want them to know who they're voting for and why. That's what I push for. That's why I have this show. I want you to understand the laws that are being passed, the policies in our state, what your leaders have done, and why we either need a change or we need to continue on course. That's the whole point of voting. Our founding fathers wanted people to be able to vote. They wanted their own voices heard in Parliament in Britain because they wanted to fight for a better government, because they understood that for people to be governed, the people had to be heard, and that the people should be the ones who are governing. What ballot harvesting is doing, though, is it is often going to groups of people or areas where voters are often not informed, all because they want to continue the machine forward for their specific candidate. So it completely misses the entire heart of what our voting system was designed for. And a specific concern that has come up in California is regarding something like homeless shelters, because anyone can register to vote in California, and every registered voter gets a mail-in ballot regardless of where they live or what they're doing. And so people can go to homeless shelters. They can stand over the homeless person and watch them fill out their ballot. They can help them fill out their ballot, and then they can take all of those ballots and they can submit them for them. But are we making informed decisions? If we have hundreds of homeless people who are homeless because oftentimes they're on drugs, they don't know what's going on, they don't get a job, they don't contribute to society, they don't even try to get off the streets to house themselves, should those votes overrule your one vote? Are those votes informed votes about what is going on in their government? Or is your vote being overruled by a machine that just wants to get as many votes as possible for their candidate? And so they will go to great lengths in order to be able to do that. These questions and these concerns are not unfounded. You might hear this and think it's crazy. You might be saying, nobody does that. Nobody goes to the homeless shelters. That's insane. That's conspiratorial. But here's the thing. A 64-year-old woman, Brenda Lee Armstrong, was convicted this year. She's from Marina del Rey. She was convicted of a felony because it was found that she was paying people on Skid Row to sign ballot initiatives that she wanted to get on the ballot. So that was her job, is that she would go around trying to get initiatives, like the person who stands outside of Target and is like, sign my little clipboard here. That was her job. And so instead of standing outside of Target and getting people to sign, she realized there's a bunch of people who live on Skid Row. They're not doing anything. And if I give them a few dollars, they will be completely incentivized to do whatever I ask them to do. So that's what she did. And additionally, she registered people to vote so that she would be able to go back and pick up their ballots. And she used her own home address, I think it was a prior address that she used, so that they could be registered even though they were homeless. That's one woman. And she was doing this job for over 20 years before she was caught of this and convicted. So that is troubling. That should raise alarm bells in our minds of who else is doing this, what else is going on. If this is one person, there's going to be other people who are doing the same kind of practice. And when you start to see ballots dumping in from mail-in voters at the last minute who are all voting for one specific candidate who wasn't doing so well, I think it's completely fair to ask the question, is this ethical? Is the process that's set up in our state, is it actually moral? Is it actually defending our rights and our speech and our ability to form our government? Or have we shifted now into a do whatever it takes to win mentality? Because that hurts voters. That hurts you and me. And so ballot harvesting should be, in my opinion, illegal. And in many states, it is illegal. But in California, it's not only legal, it's completely unlimited. So considering all of this, it makes complete sense that people have questions about what's going on with the LA mayoral race right in front of them, because we see that Pratt had such a large lead. He was 8 to 10 points ahead of Rahman. And slowly, every day, as more and more ballots dropped, there were just wildly percentages for Rahman. And obviously, less and less for Spencer Pratt that started to move him down. The interesting thing, though, is that in a lot of those ballot drops, there are not a lot of votes for Karen Bass. Her number really hasn't pushed up that high. It's mostly Rahman who has been able to project forward higher and higher. So the question is, how is it that the incumbent mayor who usually does the best, usually an incumbent, especially in a Democrat city, when they are a Democrat, they are usually going to be the ones who get the most votes. And so it's hard to overcome them. That was the whole challenge with Pratt. Can he shake this up enough to be able to get into the top 2 to have a runoff election? How is it that Karen Bass, as the incumbent, the one who everybody knows her name, is being overtaken by Rahman, who most people had never heard of, who is a literal Democratic socialist and is on city council of LA. She's an LA city council member. How is it that she now is getting the largest share of candidates' votes in every single ballot drop? That just seems suspicious, but it's not just that it seems suspicious and is unfounded. It seems suspicious in conjunction with the voter registration and with the ballot harvesting that we see is allowed in California and that we can be sure is happening to some degree. And so the question becomes, to what degree is that influencing the election unfairly or negatively? That's what we need to find out. This is not crazy to ask. Voters absolutely deserve transparency and they absolutely deserve an investigation. So when there are questions about this process, it needs to be looked into and those results need to be openly shared with the people of California. We may not be able to say with full certainty what is happening in the LA mayoral race. We don't have hard evidence for that, so we have to be careful about the claims that we make. But we can build an argument like we've just seen today about the vulnerabilities and weaknesses, and we see specific instances of fraud being actually perpetuated, actually happening in LA, so much so that I absolutely believe that our government needs to have a full investigation into this election specifically. And that brings us to the current federal investigation that has been opened into California's election processes. And this is not new. This actually happened back in the fall. The Assistant Attorney General demanded that California hand over its statewide voter registration list, and it wanted to go through and it wanted to determine eligibility. So it wanted to make sure that everybody who's on the registration list actually was eligible to vote. Now, of course, California refused that. They did not want to hand over their voter rolls. And so the DOJ sued the California Secretary of State. And at the time, Attorney General was Pam Bondi. She put it plainly saying, quote, "Clean voter rolls are the foundation of free and fair elections. Every state has a responsibility to ensure that voter registration records are accurate, accessible, and secure. States that don't fulfill that obligation will see this Department of Justice in court." And so that's what they were going after. They wanted to see, does California actually maintain clean, fair, accurate voter rolls? Now, in January of this year, that was actually dismissed by a federal judge. He said that the DOJ didn't have standing for what they were asking for, that California was protected under privacy laws that weren't preempted by federal law. And so, of course, the DOJ appealed, and so it's still going on. And now it's before the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. But because of this election, because of the primary, all of the questions are coming back into the open, and now the public is seeing as well how important it is that an investigation is done, even if not by the federal government, by someone to look into voter registration and into our voter rolls. And so in light of all of this, the first Assistant U.S. Attorney, Bill Asaley, he is working with the Attorney General Office to perform a comprehensive audit of California's voter rolls. And so he said, quote, "The state has stonewalled every effort to verify that only eligible U.S. citizens are registered to vote. My office will not look the other way. We will investigate and prosecute. Every legal vote deserves to be counted. Every illegal vote cancels one out." So California has 23 million voters who are registered to vote in our state. And we have a system that allows people to just show their gym membership as proof of identity and eligibility. So it is absolutely vital that this investigation happens. And it's good that it's being exposed to the public. It's good that our federal government is looking into it. And so we need to continue championing this kind of transparency because this is going to give voters answers that they absolutely deserve. If there are people on the voter rolls in California who aren't eligible to vote, they should be kicked off. And honestly, our leaders should want that. Our leaders should absolutely want to make sure that they are abiding with state and federal law. And the fact that they don't want that, the fact that they are pushing hard against that, the fact that they do not want to cooperate is very concerning. So, a lot has been said about California's processes. A lot has been criticized about California's processes. But what could really be done about this? Could a leader like Steve Hilton, if given the chance, actually change all of this? What could be done to make California's elections feel more fair, to give voters confidence again? I want to look very quickly at one example of a state that we could model ourselves after, because there was a state that had a lot of election integrity concerns. There was a state where voters were not assured of the results of elections, but they changed. They updated their processes, and now their election integrity is being coined as the gold standard across the country. And that state is Florida. So I know Florida has a sketchy history with elections. We all remember the 2000 presidential election, Bush v. Gore. We know that there was the whole controversy about the hanging chads happening at the time. And we know that that recount actually went all the way up to the Supreme Court. So Florida had its troubles. It had problems, and it really was the laughing stock in the idea of election integrity and being able to count ballots accurately. But after the 2020 election, some massive changes were made. And those changes have completely changed the entire system in how the votes are counted and how elections are conducted, to where now Florida sets a great standard for places like California to follow. What are some of these changes that they enacted? First of all, voter ID. So Florida enacted that it requires your driver's license, the last four of your social security number, or your state ID number in order to even request a mail-in ballot. They don't give any alternatives. So if you don't have one of those three things, you are not going to be able to register in order to vote. Then when it comes to ballot harvesting, they made this practice illegal. It is actually a third-degree felony if someone commits this. So it's not just limited to certain people, it's actually made an entire crime. With the voter rolls, they require annual voter roll maintenance in order to purge any ineligible voters off the voter rolls or off of being registered to vote, which is just makes so much sense. I do not understand why every state wouldn't want to do this, but that's what they do. And then lastly, with counting speed, this is probably the biggest one, they made it so that election officials can count and tally mail-in ballots prior to election day, so that on election day, we're already ready to go. The mail-in ballots have already been tallied. They've been tallied without any sort of results coming out, without any pressure on specific candidates. And so then by election night, you can actually have results because day of results come in, and then you already have these other votes counted. So what have been the outcomes of this? Well, in 2022, after all of these changes were enacted, every single race of the midterm was called on election night. And it was called with certainty, and it didn't switch days and weeks later. And so this is why the James Madison Institute, which did a comprehensive review of Florida's election administration, they called this the gold standard, which is something that honestly has never been said about any process in California. I don't know what we would be the gold standard of other than fraud, waste, abuse, and mismanagement. But anyway, Florida is the gold standard for this. It has been functioning so well. They've actually had higher and higher voter turnout as a result of this. And so this clearly is the model. This works. All of the new policies that they enacted have cleaned it up so that voters can have absolute certainty in the results of their elections. California needs the political will to make the same change. And unfortunately, our leaders don't have that currently in government because they don't have any incentive to change a process that's already giving them the outcomes that they want. But reform is necessary in order to restore trust. And so if our government leaders truly want people to trust the results, then they need to reform the system. Now, we have covered a lot in this episode. This is a very long episode. I think everything has been very important. And I want to end on a note of encouragement because I know when we talk about election integrity, it gets really dicey and it's really tough to say, well, if we can't even change how elections are done until we get someone new in office, but we can't get someone new in office because the problem is the elections, what are we supposed to do? Why does it matter? Should we even continue to engage? But I want to emphasize, the path forward is not only one thing, it's multifaceted. So our only chance for change is not just Steve Hilton as the governor or Spencer Pratt as the mayor of LA, or even there's an initiative that's going to go to our ballots in November about voter ID. All of those things are good. They're very important. We want to push for them. But one in isolation is not going to be the answer. The answer is pressure that's going to be applied consistently and continuously to the system, to a system that has not been questioned in previous years, to a system that has not been investigated. If we continue speaking up, if we continue calling things out, if we continue championing these types of investigations, that is how we are going to push for change. And so think about what has happened even just in the last week. A federal prosecutor walked into a vote counting center in LA because we are opening an investigation into it. The DOJ launched multiple fraud investigations related to our elections. The voter roll case advanced to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals and is still being fought. The Republican of Spencer Pratt was in the top two of the LA mayoral race on election night. That is a huge deal, even if things have shifted over the next several days. Millions of Californians watch that race and are asking in real time, why are things changing? This seems sketchy. And so more people are emboldened to speak out. The president himself has gone on record saying that weird things are happening in California, and that he suspects fraud and that his administration is going to do something about it. All of these steps matter. All of these steps apply pressure to shine a spotlight on what's happening in California. And when that spotlight is shown, that is how we continue to move forward slowly, but move forward nonetheless toward change. And the honest truth about how to beat a system that seems completely stacked against you is to continue to show up in ways that the system does not expect. You continue to to make numbers that they didn't plan for. We have to have an outsized impact. We have to change hearts and minds. We have to talk to our neighbors. We have to try to change the people around us to be voting differently so that it is such a big margin that it's undeniable, that it's, again, something that was not planned for, even in the poor execution of our state's own election processes. That means that even when you're skeptical, even when you're doubting, even when you're dissatisfied by our state, you still vote. You still be faithful with what you are given, regardless of what others are going to do with it, regardless of if it is or is not entirely fair. You don't give up, because what guarantees that nothing will change is if you do nothing. If you do nothing, nothing will get better. If you do something, there is hope that enough of us do something that we can continue applying enough pressure to actually change the process. Elections are only truly rigged when good people believe that it is all completely hopeless and that nothing they do matters. The Democrat machine in California wants you to be hopeless. They want you to give into hopelessness. But my plea to you would be, do not give that to them. Thank you so much for joining me here today. I hope it was helpful for you as you navigate life in our state and that you learned something new. If you love this show, please spread the word and share it with your friends, family, and fellow Californians. And I'll see you right back here next week for another episode of the California Conversation.